Greetings. It's Monday, July the 14th, 2025. I'm Thomas Caldwell of the Aurelian Column, and this is the Monday Morning Report. The Trump administration continues to surprise everyone, and not just its enemies, its supporters, and its, I'm sad to say, former supporters. And I'm not just speaking about the Epstein files that have vanished and the case that's no longer the case, and, well, that's been done to death just about every place. No. The Trump administration is going into all sorts of interesting directions. Now, we'll revisit the Epstein issue at the end of today's visit, but let's go into all the other things that are happening in this rather eventful summer of the infamous year 2025. The U.S. has started to rearm Ukraine again, and if noted warmongering Senator Lindsey Graham is to be believed, Mr. Zelensky will be getting more weapons and ammo than the Biden administration provided him. Wow! What's going on there? What's happening? Whatever happened to all those campaign promises, the phone calls that would end the war almost immediately? Well, what usually happens to campaign promises, they get forgotten. Real politics steps up to the bat and starts to play. And that's where we find ourselves. Among the new weapons for Ukraine will be Patriot missile defense systems, which are arguably useful to an extent against the latest Russian hypersonic missiles. It's going to be more of the same, and a lot more people are going to die. The smart money, of course, is that Russia will probably take over all of Ukraine eventually, or at least most of it, and maybe other parts of it will go to Hungary, and Romania will grab something. You never know. Europe is kind of like that. Borders are a sport as opposed to something that actually lasts. There is going to be a war for some time there, and it's not a good thing. The people that will be making money, of course, besides Mr. Zelensky, who's been getting, well, a lot of cash, is anybody who makes weapons. Anybody and everybody who makes weapons are cashing in big on this, as they have been for many years, as is always the case with such conflicts. Oh, and the German president is calling for universal military conscription in his country. A draft, yes. A large German military force is to be raised to potentially go to war with Russia. Have I heard that one before someplace? Think that'll go well again for anybody? Mark Twain said it best. History does not repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. Oh, and to make this conflict even more impactful on the world around us, legislation is being proposed in Congress that would give the Trump White House the authorization to impose up to 500% tariffs on nations trading with Russia. Yes, 500%. 500% tariffs. So if your country sells Russia baby food, your country will have to pay 500% tax on what you sell to the United States. And that will apply to each and every one of America's trading partners. China, Japan, Taiwan, as well as, well, honestly, just about everybody sells something to Russia. That doesn't sound very smart, does it? Now, whether or not that legislation becomes law or Trump decides to impose such penalties if he has the power is still unknown. But the fact that such actions are being contemplated is beyond the pale. Such economic action would drive the planet into a deep depression. Not a recession, it would drive it into the dirt. Clearly, somebody or somebodies need to sober up. Things are moving very quickly in the Russia versus Ukraine NATO conflict, and that is a problem because when things happen quickly is when miscalculations and serious errors are made. And speaking of deadly things falling out of the sky, the preliminary report is in on the Air India crash from last month. The 787 Dreamliner that suddenly crashed on takeoff, killed a whole bunch of people on their way to the United Kingdom. Well, it's officially being reported that the fuel to the engines was suddenly cut off during takeoff. And that seems to have been done in the cockpit where switches were thrown. Now, what that means exactly is not certain. We don't completely know yet. As I have been telling people for years, when it comes to airline crashes, these sorts of investigations take a long time. But it needs to be considered that the crash was possibly intentional. Either that or a horrible error on the part of one of the pilots. Switches on the control panel may have broken or switched by themselves, but that does seem to be quite unlikely. It also needs to be said that in recent history there have been too many cases of pilots intentionally crashing their aircraft. I won't list all of them here, but among the most infamous is the fate of Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 that disappeared over the Indian Ocean back in 2014 while carrying 239 passengers. Now, although that case is formally considered inconclusive, an overwhelming amount of circumstantial evidence points to the pilot hijacking his own plane and crashing it into the sea in a very remote area. And sadly, the reasons for such an act may never be known. The fact that that wreckage has never been recovered means it probably never will be. Even though we have amazingly reliable aircraft at this day and age, and other technology that is almost flawless, the human factor continues to remain the flawed factor, as we're about as unreliable as ever. Meanwhile, America's border wars are continuing. The nationwide fight to arrest, process, and deport tens of millions of illegal invaders to their home countries continues. People still protesting here and there, claiming all sorts of bizarre things, which I will not repeat here. But I would like to recommend to our nation's mental health care professionals that if you're looking for new clients, just go to an anti-ICE protest. You'll probably find a lot to choose from. In spite of many people cheering this sort of activity, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency is being given a budget many times larger than any other federal law enforcement body. And whatever you think of kicking out illegals, there has never been a case of federal law enforcement capabilities being reduced in size once they were increased in size. Even though hunting down and deporting illegal invaders will take many years, a very effective and ruthless policing apparatus is being created that can, in the future, be used for other activities. And that should be concerning. The Trump administration is constructing a very ruthless system to achieving its goals, noble as they are. Law enforcement systems involving state-of-the-art surveillance and the utilization of, yes, artificial intelligence. And since it's not a foregone conclusion that a Republican, especially one who thinks and acts like Donald Trump, will win the White House in 2028, the deep state is and probably will be a serious force to reckon with for many years to come. Can you imagine some liberal democratic socialist or whatever they call themselves wielding the sort of power that is now being introduced into the executive branch of our government? Can you imagine the sort of tactics being employed by ICE on illegals being employed by a leftist president on political enemies, calling them homophobic or racist or something? Think about it, because somebody needs to. Oh, and remember that lawsuit filed against Candace Owens, the YouTube commentator, by the alleged French First Lady Brigitte Macron? The one that claims that she is actually a he? Well, the case was overturned by an appeals court in France. To be fair, the French did not declare Mrs. Macron a man, simply that Ms. Owens had the right to make the allegations. That's not the same thing. Nobody had a medical exam and nobody took pictures or whatever. There is a lot of interesting evidence about this, but then again, there's a lot of interesting evidence about a lot of things these days. At the end of the day, though, the history of Mr. and Mr. or Mrs. Macron is a pretty disgusting one. She or he went after the current French president when he was only 14 years old. That makes my stomach turn every time I see them. Knowing that, it's kind of disgusting. Charles de Gaulle and Napoleon Bonaparte must be not only spinning in their graves, but vomiting in them. But, my fellow Americans, this is a French problem. We here in the United States have enough of our own to deal with, so let the French be French and let's move on to other things. The war between Iran and the Israeli-USA tag team is still there, just not as obvious or as hot as it can or probably will be. The Houthis in Yemen have sunk another ship in the Red Sea. This time they killed 3 merchant seamen in the process. Several others injured, some rescued, some taken hostage. But still, they've drawn blood. They've killed innocents whose only crime was working on a ship delivering soybeans someplace. Iran is backing these thugs, of course, giving them weapons, funding, and probably actionable intel. And now that Iran has apparently survived the initial attacks in their war with Israel and the U.S., they're going to keep fighting. Like I've been saying for some time, if you don't win a war outright after you start one, and you don't defeat your enemy, you're going to be fighting them for a long, long time. Something to look forward to. Yes, folks, it's become quite clear that the Trump administration is more than a little overwhelmed at the moment. And that leads me back to the Jeffrey Epstein case and why things have been playing out the way they have. It's a foregone conclusion that the late Mr. Epstein had a taste for young children when it came to satisfying his physical pleasures, and he helped other rich and powerful men and women do the same. Probably for blackmail, but also probably for just fun and friendship. He was part of the global elite you hear so much about. And that leads us to a very inconvenient truth about our justice system and the world we live in. Rich people are just that, rich. They can afford the best in the way of legal defense and legal services when they are needed. In the United States, we really don't have a justice system. We have a legal system. And those who have the most money have the best chance of not being punished for anything they are accused of or guilty of. Let's look at the Epstein case from a purely legal point of view, a practical one. First, there are no witnesses, at least none to speak of, none that will come forward, or any who are really still alive. Quite a few of them have dropped off. That includes Mr. Epstein himself. He was the only person who would be considered a credible witness, and he's gone. His old colleague, Ms. Maxwell, she's now in prison doing 20 years, and it's doubtful she's going to say anything, lest she would also suffer some unfortunate fate while behind bars. And I'm sure she knows it, as everybody does who's listening to me right now. Okay, let's say, for example, the Trump people wanted to prosecute all these movers and shakers. Well, let's say we have a video of a tech billionaire doing something horrible to some young person. What if that comes out? Well, they could always say that it was something consensual. I doubt very much there's video that is really high quality. That usually isn't the case with these sorts of things. Now, they'd have to identify the people in these videos. That's probably not doable. And the people who would be identified would probably not come forward and testify. They could also say that the video was mistaken for someone else. and that the whole thing was fake generated by AI. That is going to be a defense you're going to see in a lot of places in the coming years. How are you going to prove it? Really, how are you going to prove it? If somebody has so much money that they can hire the best lawyers on earth and pay them enormous sums so they could retire when this case is done, what chances do you think they have for success? If you really think about how cases like this are prosecuted when it comes to lower-level people, they're usually not successful even among people with a fraction of the resources to defend themselves. If you really think about it, and it's a very unsettling thought, there is no way to get these people. No way. No way to prosecute them successfully. No way to prove they are guilty or punish them if they are guilty. They have too much money, and that means in America you can get away with just about anything. That is a very unsettling but an inconvenient truth. Trump and his people may have just come to that conclusion. I don't really think Donald Trump had anything to do with this, because if he did, he wouldn't have pushed this so much earlier on, especially during his campaign. He knew the guy, but he's also responsible for the guy probably being prosecuted initially in the first case that got him. What probably is going on is they're cutting a deal with the sick, perverted billionaire class that rules over our nation. Given all the stuff they have on their plate at the moment, going after Epstein clients, many whom were probably at Trump's inauguration as far as we know, it just might not be worth their time. The resources and the effort won't amount to anything. So it's better that some deal was cut. You know, back in the day, there was a man named J.P. Morgan. He was considered one of the most evil financiers of the early 20th century. He thought that if the ratio of earnings to the person on the street was more than 20 to 1, it was excessive. Some of these people that now rule over us, the tech billionaires, and soon we'll probably start seeing trillionaires, they have a ratio of earnings from the person on the street to themselves of about 1,000 to 1 in some cases. That's the highest ratio, arguably, in human history. Far higher than China, far higher than the Soviet Union, and that took them down. Far higher than the days of the robber baron when we had sweatshops and child labor. The people who are at the top, the people who used to go to Epstein Island, and even more frightening, the people that Mr. Epstein didn't put on his client list or didn't list in the logs of his airplane, no way of being punished. No way of being subject to our laws. And the Trump people probably just came to that conclusion. They have a lot of fish to fry right now. But realistically, even if the U.S. government decided to prosecute all these people, it's doubtful they could do so successfully. That is the real frightening thing. Not the hundreds of thousands of children who go missing every year. Not all of the horrible stories that a few decades ago were considered conspiracy and now we know are true. Maybe they are lizards, at least in terms of their cold-bloodedness. The people at the top in this country have very, very sick tastes. If we've learned anything, it's that. It's going to take an awful lot more than revealing a list of perverts on the internet to take these people down and to restore a sense of justice to our arguably dying civilization. That's it for today. If you appreciate my work, please like, subscribe, and share. Share with your friends and share with your enemies. They're probably sick of the mess at the top as well. And please consider a paid subscription. It keeps the lights on literally and figuratively. I can be reached at feedback@aureliancolumn.com. That's feedback@aureliancolumn.com. I'm up on X. My handle there is MICCAMPEN. That's MICCAMPEN. This podcast originates at Substack. My handle there is aureliancolumn.substack.com. Until we meet again, be good, be safe, be vigilant, and remember, Clown World, the Deep State, and all the people on Jeffrey Epstein's real list must be destroyed. Good day.